On October 3, 1955, a 69-foot vessel named Joyita slipped out of Apia Harbor in western Samoa. She was bound for the Tokelau Islands, a chain of remote atolls 270 miles to the north. 25 people were aboard: government officials, a doctor, copra workers heading home, and a crew of experienced Pacific hands. The voyage was supposed to take 2 days. Joyita was no ordinary vessel. Built in 1931 as a luxury yacht in Los Angeles, she had served the U.S. Navy during the Second World War as a patrol boat. After the war, she ended up in Samoa, battered, repainted, repurposed. But one thing about her original construction had never changed. Her hull was lined with cork, several tons of it packed tight between the planking and the frames. This single feature would become the central paradox of everything that followed. A cork-lined hull meant one thing: the Joyita could not sink. No matter how much water she took on, she would stay afloat. Her captain was Thomas Henry Dusty Miller, British-born, 63 years old, a veteran of decades at sea. Miller had settled in Samoa after the war and made the Joyita his home. He knew every plank, every fitting, every weakness in her aging hull. More than anyone else on Earth, Dusty Miller understood what this ship could survive. Miller had refused to take another vessel for this voyage. He had turned down offers of newer, faster boats. He wanted the Joyita. He trusted her buoyancy, her cork, her ability to ride out whatever the South Pacific could throw at her. An experienced captain does not abandon a ship he knows cannot sink. That fact would haunt every investigator who came after. But Miller also knew the Joyita had problems. One of her 2 engines was dead. Her radio had been unreliable for weeks. She was overdue for a proper refit. Miller had sailed through worse before. He was confident he would manage. The Joyita departed with 4 tons of cargo: timber, food supplies, medical equipment, and empty oil drums. She also carried 70 cases of aluminum sheeting bound for the atolls. The weather forecast was clear. The sea was calm. The route between Samoa and Tokelau was well-traveled, and inter-island vessels made this crossing regularly without incident. With only 1 working engine, the Joyita would be slower than usual, perhaps 3 days instead of 2. But the passengers were in no rush. The copra workers were heading home. The government officials had routine business. The doctor aboard, Dr. Doig Parsons, carried a medical bag packed for the island clinics. Nobody considered the voyage dangerous. There was no reason to. It was supposed to be a routine Pacific crossing. What happened next would confound investigators for decades. The Joyita never arrived in Tokelau. After she was 2 days overdue, the New Zealand Royal Air Force launched a search. Aircraft covered thousands of square miles of open ocean. Ships swept the route between Samoa and the atolls. They found nothing. No debris. No life raft. No signal flare. No oil slick. 25 people had vanished into the South Pacific without leaving a single trace. The search was expanded. More planes, more ships, more empty ocean. After days of finding nothing, the operation was called off. Every one of those 25 people was presumed dead. 5 weeks later, November 10, 1955, a merchant vessel spotted the Joyita drifting in open ocean. She was 600 miles from her intended course. Her port side was almost entirely submerged. She was listing so severely that her starboard rail was touching the waves. But she was floating. After 5 weeks adrift, after taking on thousands of gallons of seawater, the Joyita was still above the surface. The cork held. Dusty Miller had been right about one thing. This ship truly could not sink. A boarding party climbed onto the half-submerged deck. They searched the flooded cabins. They checked the engine room. They opened every hatch and compartment they could reach. Not a single person was aboard. The boarding party cataloged what they found. The radio was tuned to the international distress frequency, 2182 kilocycles. But the antenna cable was snapped clean. Any distress call would have gone nowhere. Someone had tried to signal for help. The signal never left the ship. The ship's clocks had stopped at different times, not simultaneously as they would in a sudden catastrophe, but in sequence. This suggested the flooding had been gradual, hours, not minutes. Whoever was aboard had time. A makeshift canvas awning had been rigged over the deckhouse, as if someone had been sheltering from the tropical sun for an extended period. This was not a panicked evacuation. Someone had stayed aboard long enough to build a sunshade. Then there was the doctor's bag. It was open. Inside, scalpels, surgical instruments, and bandages soaked through with blood. Someone aboard the Joyita had been seriously injured. Someone had needed surgery at sea on a slowly flooding ship with a radio that could not transmit. 4 tons of cargo were missing, including all 70 cases of aluminum sheeting. The navigation equipment was gone. The logbook was gone. If the crew had abandoned ship, where were the life rafts? If pirates had boarded, why was the ship left floating with supplies still in the hold? Dusty Miller knew this vessel could not sink. He had spent years proving it. A captain with that knowledge does not climb into a raft and paddle away from guaranteed buoyancy, unless he is no longer making the decisions. Did Miller die from whatever injury required those bloody bandages? Was the crew forced off at gunpoint? The New Zealand Board of Inquiry reached no conclusion. 25 people gone. A ship that refused to sink, still floating. And in the doctor's open bag, blood that belonged to someone whose name was never confirmed. The Joyita drifted for 5 weeks with no one aboard, yet she refused to go under. Her cork-lined hull outlasted every soul who had sailed on her. But the Joyita left physical evidence: bloody bandages, a broken radio cable, clocks frozen at different hours. The next vessel found drifting and empty would leave something far stranger. Not blood, not broken equipment. 3 notebooks full of a man losing his mind. In 1968, the Sunday Times of London announced the Golden Globe Race, the first solo, non-stop circumnavigation of the globe by sailboat. No crew, no port calls, no support vessels. 1 person, 1 boat, around the world and back. 9 men entered. The race attracted seasoned ocean sailors who had spent years on blue water. Robin Knox Johnston, Bernard Moitessier, Nigel Tetley. These were professionals who understood what 40,000 miles of solo sailing demanded. The isolation, the storms, the months alone with nothing but the horizon. Among them was one man who did not belong. Donald Crowhurst was a 36-year-old electronics engineer from Bridgewater, England. His business was failing. He had a wife, 4 children, and mounting debts. The Golden Globe offered a way out: the cash prize, the sponsorship deals, the fame of rounding the world alone. There was one problem. Crowhurst had never sailed across an ocean. His boat was a trimaran called Tangmouth Electron. She had been built in a rush with borrowed money and untested designs. On her sea trials, she leaked. Her hatches did not seal properly. Her self-righting system, the mechanism that would save his life if the boat capsized, had never been tested in open water. Crowhurst knew all of this. His own private notes described the problems in detail. He entered the race anyway. He departed Tynemouth on October 31st, 1968, the last possible day to qualify. What was supposed to be a voyage around the world would become something else entirely. Within weeks, Crowhurst realized that Tynemouth Electron could not survive the Southern Ocean. The hull flexed dangerously in heavy seas. Water poured through the hatches. Rounding Cape Horn in this boat would be suicide. He faced a choice: turn back in public humiliation and financial ruin, or lie. He chose to lie. Donald Crowhurst never left the Atlantic Ocean. While radioing positions that placed him off the coast of Africa and then deep in the South Pacific, he was actually drifting in slow circles in the South Atlantic, hundreds of miles from where he claimed to be. He maintained 2 logbooks. One contained his real positions. The other held fabricated coordinates, carefully calculated to match plausible sailing speeds and wind conditions. The deception was meticulous. Every false entry cross-referenced with weather data he picked up by radio. For months, it worked. Race officials in London had no reason to doubt him. His reports placed him among the leaders. But the logbooks tell a second story, one that has nothing to do with navigation. Crowhurst filled 3 volumes with increasingly erratic writing. The early pages are sharp, analytical, calculating. He describes wind conditions, equipment failures, the mechanics of his fraud with cold precision. By the middle entries, the tone shifts. Crowhurst writes about time itself, about the nature of human consciousness, about mathematical proofs that reality is an illusion. The handwriting grows larger and more erratic. He crosses out passages and rewrites them. Some pages contain equations that attempt to connect Einstein's physics to the existence of God. The final entries span 25,000 words of dense, obsessive text. Crowhurst claims to have reached a state of cosmic understanding, a revelation that transcends the physical world. He writes about escaping, about leaving, about a boundary between existence and something beyond it. The last dated entry is July 1st, 1969. The final line reads, "It is the mercy." Then, nothing. On July 10th, 1969, the Royal Mail vessel Picardy spotted the Tynemouth Electron drifting 700 miles southwest of the Azores, near the Sargasso Sea. She was intact. Her hull was sound. The life raft was still lashed to the deck. Navigation lights were working. Inside the cabin, the scene was orderly. Personal belongings were in place. Food remained in the galley. The 3 logbooks sat neatly on the chart table. One item was missing: the ship's chronometer, the precision timepiece used for celestial navigation. Everything else was accounted for. Donald Crowhurst was gone. The accepted conclusion is suicide. Crowhurst trapped between exposure as a fraud and a mental breakdown documented across 25,000 words, stepped off his boat and into the Atlantic. The logbooks are considered his final testament, a record of disintegration written in real time. But one detail has never been satisfactorily explained. The chronometer was the only object missing from the entire vessel. A man about to take his own life does not need a ship's chronometer. Why take it? Did he board a passing vessel? Did he plan, in some final delusion, to navigate somewhere else?
Here is what makes the Crowhurst case different from every other missing sailor. The answers are written down. 25,000 words. 3 volumes. Every day accounted for, right up until the day he was no longer there.
His body was never recovered. His fraud was not exposed until after his disappearance. Had he completed the fake circumnavigation, he would have won the race and faced immediate scrutiny that would have destroyed him. The forged logbook would not have survived a single day of expert review.
The ocean gave him a way out before the world closed in. Whether he chose it or simply slipped into it, no one knows. The chronometer went with him.
Crowhurst's trimaran drifted with its answers laid out on the chart table. 3 logbooks documenting a man who unraveled page by page. The sea had taken him quietly. No collision, no explosion, no witnesses. The next disaster would be the exact opposite. 2 enormous passenger ships, 1,200 people between them, both equipped with radar, both watching each other on their screens. They collided anyway.
The SS Andrea Doria was Italy's pride. 697 feet of post-war ambition, launched in 1951 to prove that Italian shipbuilding had survived the war intact. She was fast, luxurious, and fitted with 11 watertight compartments. Her builders declared she could remain afloat with any 2 of those compartments completely flooded.
On July 17, 1956, she departed Genoa for New York, carrying 1,134 passengers and 572 crew. It was her 101st Atlantic crossing. Captain Piero Calamai stood at the helm, a decorated naval officer with 30 years of command experience. The crossing had been smooth. 9 days of calm seas.
What waited off the coast of Nantucket on the evening of July 25 would prove that calm seas meant nothing. Dense fog had settled over the approach to New York. Visibility dropped below half a mile. Captain Calamai ordered the foghorns sounded at regular intervals. He reduced speed, but not to the minimum the regulations required for near-zero visibility. He had radar. He trusted it.
Approaching from the opposite direction was the Swedish liner MS Stockholm, smaller, ice-strengthened, carrying 534 passengers. Her third officer, 26-year-old Johan Ernst Karstens Johansson, was alone on the bridge. He too had radar. He too was watching his screen.
Both ships identified each other electronically at a distance of 17 miles. They had nearly 30 minutes before their paths would cross. 30 minutes, 2 radar sets, 2 experienced bridge teams.
Both captains made course corrections. Stockholm turned to starboard. Andrea Doria turned to port. Each adjustment, logical in isolation, sent the 2 ships directly into each other's path. At 11:10 p.m., Stockholm's reinforced bow sliced into Andrea Doria's starboard side. The impact tore open a gash 40 feet wide and 30 feet deep.
Andrea Doria began listing immediately, not gradually, but violently. Within minutes, the ship had rolled 25 degrees to starboard. Half of her lifeboats, those on the high port side, swung out over empty air, impossible to lower. A vessel designed to save every passenger could now save only half of them. The reason was devastating and simple. After 9 days at sea, the fuel tanks on Andrea Doria's starboard side were nearly empty. When the ocean flooded the gash in her hull, there was no counterweight on the opposite side. The watertight compartments held. The ship capsized anyway.
11 hours after the collision, the Andrea Doria rolled onto her side and slipped beneath the surface. 46 people were dead, most of them killed in the first seconds of impact, crushed in their starboard cabins before anyone on the bridge understood what had happened.
In 1956, radar was supposed to have ended collisions between major vessels. Both the Andrea Doria and the Stockholm had functioning radar sets. Both officers on watch identified the other ship on their screens at 17 miles, well beyond visual range. They had time. They had information. They had the one technology that was supposed to make this impossible.
But radar shows a blip on a screen. It does not reveal which direction the other ship is heading relative to your own, not unless you plot contacts over time. Stockholm's third officer glanced at the display and made an assumption about Andrea Doria's course. He was wrong. He turned toward her instead of away.
Captain Kalamai, meanwhile, had been sailing through fog for hours at a speed well above what visibility conditions demanded. He trusted the radar to keep him clear. The screen showed him the Stockholm. It did not show him that the Stockholm was turning directly into his path. If both ships had maintained their original headings, they would have passed safely.
The legal proceedings that followed never produced a verdict. The two shipping lines settled out of court, an arrangement that guaranteed neither side admitted fault. The financial terms were sealed. The settlement itself became its own kind of mystery.
The collision exposed a flaw not in the ships, but in the humans operating them. Radar had created a false certainty. Officers who had once stopped dead in fog now maintained speed because they believed the screen showed them everything they needed to know. It did not.
The technology designed to prevent collisions had, in this case, caused one. The Andrea Doria rests on her starboard side at 240 feet, one of the most dangerous dive sites in the world. At least 16 divers have died exploring her wreck.
The Andrea Doria lies 240 feet below the Atlantic, photographed, mapped, dived on by hundreds. There is a wreck. There are answers, however incomplete. The final story offers none of that. No wreck, no ocean floor, no depth reading, not even salt water. Just a river, one of the busiest waterways in America, and a 260-foot steamboat that vanished from it without leaving a splinter.
The Mississippi River in 1872 was America's highway. Steamboats carried cotton, grain, passengers, and mail along its full length from St. Louis to New Orleans. The river was shallow, well-charted, and crowded with traffic. Vessels passed each other constantly. Every bend, every sandbar, every landing was known and named.
The SS Iron Mountain was a standard river steamboat, 260 feet long, steam-powered, with a large paddle wheel churning at her stern. She was not a small craft that could slip away unnoticed. She was a working giant of the Mississippi trade. In June 1872, she departed Vicksburg, heading downriver. Behind her trailed a string of barges loaded with cotton bales and barrels of molasses, connected by heavy hemp tow lines. More than 55 passengers were aboard. Smoke rose from her twin stacks. Her paddle wheel threw white water behind her. The Iron Mountain rounded the bend below Vicksburg in full view of the waterfront. Her crew exchanged the usual horn signals with passing traffic. Other steamboats heading upriver confirmed seeing her that afternoon. The barges trailed in a steady line behind her. Everything was routine. Then the river took her. Somewhere between Vicksburg and the next landing downstream, a stretch of the Mississippi that dozens of other steamboats traveled every single day, the SS Iron Mountain ceased to exist. She did not arrive at her next stop. She did not pass any vessel waiting downstream. She simply was not there anymore. The first sign that something was wrong came from the barges. They were found drifting downriver, intact, still loaded with cotton. But the tow lines connecting them to the Iron Mountain were gone. Not broken, not frayed, cut clean, as if sliced with a blade. The Iron Mountain was not at the other end of those lines. She was not around the next bend. She was not grounded on a sandbar. She was not at the bottom of a visible stretch of river. Steamboats ahead of her reported no sighting. Steamboats behind her had seen nothing unusual. Landings on both banks, nothing. The Mississippi was at most half a mile wide in that stretch. The Iron Mountain was 260 feet long. She had vanished from a corridor of water with witnesses on both shores. No wreckage surfaced. The Mississippi is a shallow river. In most places, the main channel runs less than 30 feet deep. A steamboat that strikes a submerged log or suffers a boiler explosion leaves debris within hours: shattered timber, furniture, cargo, bodies. The current carries everything downstream. Searchers patrolled the route for days afterward. They found nothing. No bodies were recovered. More than 55 people, passengers and crew, produced no physical trace. No floating luggage. No cotton bales bobbing in the shallows. Not a single plank from the Iron Mountain's 260-foot hull washed ashore. The cleanly cut tow lines remained the only physical evidence that anything had happened at all. Someone, or something, had separated the barges from the ship. If the Iron Mountain had sunk suddenly, the barges would have been dragged under or tangled in the wreckage. They were not. They had been set free. A boiler explosion was the first theory offered. Steamboat boilers detonated regularly in the 19th century. It was the leading cause of river disasters. But boiler explosions produce massive debris fields, shattered hull planking, scalded bodies, engine parts scattered across the riverbed. The Iron Mountain left none of that. River pirates operated on the Mississippi in that era, but pirates steal cargo and passengers. They do not make an entire ship disappear. The barges full of cotton were left untouched. If pirates wanted valuables, they left the most valuable part behind. A snag, a submerged tree trunk, could tear open a wooden hull. But a snagged boat settles into the riverbed and creates a visible obstruction. Other vessels would have struck the same wreck within days. No obstruction was ever reported at any point along the Iron Mountain's route.
152 years have passed. The Mississippi River has been dredged, widened, dammed, and charted with sonar technology that can map every object resting on its bed. No trace of the SS Iron Mountain has ever been located. Not a plank, not a boilerplate, not a paddle wheel blade, not a bale of cotton, not a single bone.
A 260-foot steamboat carrying more than 55 passengers vanished from a shallow, heavily trafficked river in broad daylight. The only evidence she had been there at all was a set of cleanly cut tow lines trailing behind drifting barges.
The river closed over whatever happened to the Iron Mountain, and in a century and a half, it has refused to give a single piece of it back.
4 vessels, 4 paradoxes. The Joyita proved a ship could be unsinkable and still lose everyone aboard. 25 people gone. The doctor's bloodied bandages the only clue that something had gone terribly wrong below deck. An unsinkable ship, abandoned. No explanation that has ever satisfied anyone.
The Tynemouth Electron proved that a man could document his own disappearance in 25,000 words and still leave the final answer missing. Crowhurst wrote everything down, every false position, every unraveling thought, every step toward whatever edge he reached on July 1st. Everything except what happened after he put down the pen.
The Andrea Doria proved that radar, the technology built specifically to prevent collisions at sea, could cause one instead. 2 ships, 2 screens, 2 captains making careful corrections, 46 dead because both vessels turned toward each other while trying to turn away. And the Iron Mountain proved that a 260-foot steamboat could vanish from a shallow river in broad daylight, leaving behind nothing but a set of cleanly cut ropes and silence. In each case, the safeguard was present and functioning. Cork that guaranteed buoyancy, logbooks that recorded every position, radar that tracked every contact, a river too shallow and too busy to hide anything. All of it was there. None of it was enough. The Joyita is still floating in the record. The logbooks are still stacked on the chart table. The radar blip is still crossing the screen. And the Mississippi still has not given back a single plank.